Kingdom CLAUS. Book 2. Of War and Snow. By Adam David Brown. Chapter 5. Behind the Walls of Gordival. The setting sun was hanging low, as evening came to pass upon the realm of Gordival. The evening sunlight used to glimmer and dance upon this once great kingdom, but now it only highlights the foul dwelling it has become. The once bright spires of its tall buildings and castles now only seem to be murky and rancid, echoes of the evil from its new master. King Amaranth had sat upon his stolen throne for 5 years now, and nothing but turmoil has been wrought from his rule. He had kept the realm running through commerce, as it always had been, but he had raised taxes significantly. Any who dared not pay were punished, significantly as well. Trade with the northwestern kingdom had been almost half of the means of Gordival's economic success, but the war ended all of that. A trade embargo established from Kingdom CLAUS was set in place at the onset of the war, and forced the people of the southeastern realm to rely on their own means of commerce. A short while before this, however, the decay slowly fed upon its host and rot was begotten. The esteem of the three barons had led to bickering between the houses of Gordival, and with that came internal embargoes throughout the entire kingdom. The former and late King Mandor IX was powerless to stop this digression and watched as his kingdom ate itself into despair. With the houses of Gordival at each other's throats and unity dissolving into bitterness, the kingdom was divided and easily conquered from within. All who lived in Gordival now did so under constant threat and under Amaranth's boot. Anyone who tried to escape was publicly executed, as to set an example onto every Gordivalian citizen. It had become a black place, a dark and twisted land of dismay. The people went about their business out of fear, for they were forced to do so under pain of death. Many no longer believed the initial claim that had the northwestern realm as assassins and started to see their new king for what he really was. There were some, however, who still trusted the lie and thought that all of their suffering was a necessary course to avenge their late king. They would simply turn a blind eye to the despair, thinking that the higher taxes were fueling the war effort and that everyone had to do their share. They were veiled by revenge and felt that the ends would justify the means. Kester and Amaranth relied heavily on the ignorance of these people. The more people that believed their lies, the more power they would have. With the terrible claw of Amaranth at the necks of the people, the new era of Gordival had begun. The barons had long been under the spell of Kester and had been made generals in the Amaranthian army, each of them commanding legions upon legions of their former troops now turned shadow men. The barons cared not for the people, only that they paid their taxes and stayed in line. They spent their time counting gold, punishing those that did not cooperate, and dispatching spies into their cities to find any who would betray the kingdom. The walls of Gordival had become an implement of war. Its once bright and gleaming stone had been covered with gnarled, black iron, and the ramparts now looked like black fingers clawing towards the sky. The giant gate that once stayed open to welcome merchants and traders was now shut tight and locked at all times to keep any from escaping. Smoke constantly rose from the cities as blacksmiths were forced to make weapons day and night, perpetuating the gears of war. A smog laid upon the kingdom like a blanket, blocking the sunlight as if its radiance was no longer a welcomed guest. It was now an hour past sundown, and the rising moonlight shone a grim blue against the black iron wall as a dark carriage approached the gate. It sat upon long silver sleigh blades and seemed blacker than black as it glided across the snow. It was pulled by a team of 4 broad steeds. They too were blacker than night and snorted and guffed as they stamped and trudged through the snowy plain. The carriage was driven by a cloaked figure, hunched in his high seat, and seemed only to be a silhouette against the night sky. The carriage itself was of black oak and iron. It had magnificent and elegant yet ghastly and horrid carvings upon its body and silver fixtures upon its door. This was the black carriage of Kester, and its appearance was one that befell him well. It creaked and swished as it pulled before the gate of Gordival. A deep and droning horn sounded from behind the wall, and the giant iron gate slowly swung open. The black carriage pulled into Caliphate with a cloud of snow billowing behind it. The main street was quiet and dark, with only a few dim lamps lighting the road. This place was once bustling at all hours, the streets alive with cheers and merchants barking, but Caliphate had not seen such times in a long while. The murder of King Mandor IX had changed everything, and the mirth that this city had once enjoyed was only a memory. Once Amaranth took the throne, He outlawed all after-hours trading and commerce and established a strict curfew upon all of the kingdom's inhabitants. Soon after this law was initiated, he then ordered the gates to be forever closed to outsiders. The few advisors that remained from Mandor's council thought this to be folly, as it made sense that the kingdom could collect more taxes if the people had more time to make money. Furthermore, if the kingdom was kept open to outside trade, more revenue could be had. Amaranth did not see things this way and promptly had these holdover advisors executed. In Amaranth's mind, outsiders were potential threats and no good would come from business done in the dark of night. To him, that is when desperate plans would be laid, under cover of darkness and guised as trade. These actions would be that of a guilty man fearing retribution, not that a cruel and heartless man as Amaranth was, would feel such things as guilt. He enacted these policies to protect himself and to hold on to his stolen throne. It was, at first, a precaution, but slowly began to grow into a paranoia that would eat at him more than he would come to realize. He would never know it, but it gnawed him like a hound upon a soup bone. He trusted no one, and knew that a crown founded in deceit would rule under it as well. He had become king of Gordival and was now a powerful warlord and truly feared no one, but, even with all of this, he still saw threats all around him. His advisors were smarmy slinks of men that he certainly didn't trust, much less listen to. Their positions were merely that of a cosmetic nature, and their opinions and advice definitely held no sway over the new king. Amaranth felt that a king must have a court and council, even if he didn't care about them in the slightest. The three barons were no threat to him, for they were only mindless puppets of Kester and could do no harm, unless they were ordered to, by their master. And it was this fact that menaced Amaranth the most. It would be that Kester was to whom he feared most of all. Amaranth's mind would often race at the notion that his dark magician would be his demise, and his thoughts would sometimes stew, like a simmering crock, with the idea of he who had helped gain his throne would also be he that dismantled it. The king wondered endlessly as to why someone who was as powerful as Kester would need him to rule. Still, for whatever paranoias might have haunted him, and from whatever means he had gained his crown, he was the king of Gordival and no one would dare challenge him. Besides being crafty and deceitful, he was also a mighty and cunning warrior and an assassin who was the embodiment of killer instinct. Even before he stole the crown, he was all of those things disguised as one of Mandor's advisors. He feared no man that stood before him, but it was the man who stood beside him that began to give him the most worry. After all, Kester was not exactly an ordinary man and no one, save for Father Frost, would ever truly understand how powerful he was. To Amaranth, Kester was only a dark magician who sought power as much as he did and had agreed to aid him in his conquest of the north. That is until recently. Amaranth saw no man as his equal, the exception being King CLAUS who had already bested him in battle to which he now had a long scar on his face to show for. Amaranth did, however, have a reverence and outright fear of those of magic ilk, knowing full well that if anyone would be his undoing, it would be one of them. He had stayed this fear and began his partnership with Kester with the purpose being domination of the known world, and everything was going according to plan. Even though he had lost his first battle against the Northwestern Kingdom, he still had a kingdom of his own and was making certain headway in his ultimate goal. All of this being as it was, still a nagging fear pecked at him and this concern of magic dealings would always be on his mind. The fear that he had stayed was coming back to him and his mistrust in Kester, though be it not well founded, was certainly present, and on this night, he sat upon his throne, which was that of a murdered king, and awaited the arrival of his magician. The black carriage pulled down the main street, past the great house of Dolder, onward through Caliphar, the snorting of the broad steeds breaking the silent night. The whisk of the sleigh blades and the creaking of the carriage seemed to echo through the quiet streets, as it pulled on southward along the banks of the river Danon and into Merthenburg, until it reached the castle of Amaranth. The house of Mandor was once a spectacular sight to be seen in the southeast. 3 tall spires jutted out from the cityscape and their white stone seemed to touch the sky. It was a beacon of prosperity throughout the southeastern realm. This city's namesake was a testament of the bounty it shared in, as mirth was in ample supply. The riches of Merthenburg had long spread out into all of the kingdom of Gordival, and for generations, this realm was a blossom of blessings. From its fine silks to its iron ore, to its fish and walrus meat and tusks, Gordival was a fruitful tree upon the north. However, this was no longer true, as Amaranth had made those rich times only a memory. Now, this place was covered in darkness, and the name of Myrthenberg seems to be a cruel mockery of what this place once was. The king's castle now seemed black and menacing and spiteful as it leered over the city. It was a mass of shadow in the night, with only a few dim torches upon its frightful walls, their flames slowly licking at the darkness. Its dark iron gate glimmered faintly against the torchlight, and, though the gate was closed, it looked as though it was a giant and hideous maw, waiting for its next meal. This was an ominous and foreboding place, the absolute opposite of what it once was. The black carriage slid to a halt before the gate, the silver door opened, and Kester emerged. He slunk his way up the ramp and gazed at the two yellow-eyed guards. With a wave of his hand, the guards bowed and commanded the gate to be opened. There was a loud clank and then a drawn-out creak. The sound of spinning chains and winding gears could be heard throughout the quiet city as the iron gate slowly rose upward to welcome its terrible guest. The gate rumbled and clattered as it was fully drawn up and locked open with a sharp clunk. Beyond the open gate was the main hallway of the castle, which was only lit with a few candles that rested upon several altars. The altars were lined on each side of the hallway and stretched lengthwise, lighting the way to the throne room. The candles burned a pale orange glow that was being absorbed by the dark, as the blackness of this place was like a viscous muck in which light would never pierce. At the end of the hallway was a large door, and on both sides stood a soldier, spears in hand, the candlelight reflecting off of their silver helmets, and a look of death was upon them. Their skin was grey and their eyes yellowed by the vile spell. Kester beckoned to them and they bowed and opened the door. Behind this door was the throne room of the line of Mandor, stolen and corrupted by Amaranth. This room was grand with high ceilings and oaken buttresses, an immaculate fireplace with a mantle of tremendous carvings of ancient warriors, and dark stone walls that were decorated with long silken banners. The banners that once hung proudly upon these walls were of bright colors, with the crests of the high houses of Gordival etched onto them. The banners that hung there now were only black with grey trim. Upon each one was stitched a single silver claw within a black sun that was represented as a silver ring. This was the crest of Amaranth. Kester walked in, and the roaring fire within the fireplace lit his pale and slender face, but the light stopped at his black and hollow eyes. Amaranth sat upon his stolen throne with a crown of gleaming silver spikes upon his head. He was adorned in solid black, with the only accents being his dark grey cape and the silver buckle of his belt. Even without his terrible armor, he was an imposing sight, a stern and grim terror of a man who sat brooding on his throne. His black beard was streaked with grey, and a long scar lay upon his face, a trophy of his defeat against the magnificent sword of CLAUS. Kester bowed slightly and said with a hiss, "Your Highness, I bring tidings that shall change our stalemate of progress. It is news that we shall relish in, my lord. No doubt it is news that I shall cherish and thank thee for thy efforts." Amaranth scoffed in reply and stood from his throne. He slowly walked towards Kester as he continued, "You wear my patience like an old coat, torn and frayed with the hope it remains useful. Each time you bring forth news, I am astounded at how remarkably disappointed I become. You hold before me plots and plans, schemes and dreams, but neither of your hands carry results. Results that I require, at the very least, to consider you needed any longer. Tell me, magician, what do you bring me this time?" Kester seemed sarcastically offended as he replied, "My lord, you hurt me so. Have I not given you a kingdom? An army at your command? It is all progress, my lord, and progress can be as a slow clock, no matter how it may tarry, it still moves forward." Amaranth was taken with thought, and he realized that what Kester had said was indeed true. Still, his mind raced to find a disagreement, and his eyes flashed as he said, "This army would have been mine without your so-called help, magician. This kingdom was meant to be mine from the very start." Kester smirked, and with a mild laugh he said, "This kingdom is yours now because of me, my lord. These men were forever loyal to the line of Mandor. I have seen their minds, I have felt what was in their hearts. They would have never followed you, nor would they have accepted your rule if it wasn't for me, your highness. Truly you forget yourself. Is the burden of power and the weight of the crown so heavy that such load would squeeze the good sense from your being? Trust me, your highness, these men, this army in which you say would have followed you otherwise, certainly would have slain you and laid low any notion that would see you as any more than a malcontented usurper. You, in all of your stolen splendor and supplanted scepters, need me. You know this, and that is what scares you." Amaranth was infuriated at such insolence, and yet found himself agreeing with everything Kester had said. Perhaps it was that this magician was not only a weaver of spells, but of convincing words as well. For all of what Kester said was true, the army was loyal to Mandor and would have surely killed Amaranth in retaliation of such treachery. Had it not been for the vile spell Kester had put upon them, that would have certainly been the outcome. Everything that Amaranth had achieved thus far was because of Kester. Amaranth knew this to be true, and it angered him so, but he knew also that further argument would be a pointless endeavor. He simply glared at the magician and knew not what to say next. Kester's eyes squinted and his smirk grew larger as he said, "Fear not, my lord. I see that even as I stand before you that you surmise of my betrayal. That notion is a mere riddle that you are too afraid to ask, and even more afraid to answer. Our purpose is of the same path, and our fate shall be the same as well." The king was strangely comforted by this, though whether he was truly comforted or simply wanted to believe the magician's words out of convenience, will never be known. Any strike against Kester now would, in all certainty, destroy anything Amaranth had achieved and anything he would hope to accomplish. He needed Kester, and, for now, that fact would have to do. Amaranth's brow furrowed as he said, "Bah! Your words may be true, magician, but I say to you, it would be far better to die by the swords of loyal soldiers than to do so of old age waiting on the fulfilled promises of a slinking warlock. Tell me, magician, what is your news this time?" Kester went on to tell of his success with the final night raid and of taking the realm of Bearsbane, and how the southern lands of the Free Mountains were now Amaranth's for the taking. He continued on to speak of his greatest success in locating where exactly the elm stave was hidden, and how this would be the pivotal hinge of the war. It was this that troubled Amaranth the most, for he had remained unsure of what the ultimate goal of Kester's plan was. He vaguely knew of the elm stave, but wasn't entirely sure as to why Kester sought it with such fever. All that Kester would ever say in regards to the matter was that it would be a tremendous weapon and that it would ensure victory over CLAUS. Amaranth's confusion lingered, and, at the moment, decided to ask once again. He paced slowly as he said, "You still have yet to reveal to me your intention with this weapon of yours. Yet have you disclosed what this elm stave shall do for me? I have spent too much time and effort for you to keep secrets and to only answer me with riddles. And I suspect that you shall wish for more troops to storm the mountains in search of something that you have yet to tell me its purpose. A weapon, you say? And to what magnitude is this weapon? Would it be beyond my control? Would it be my undoing or, indeed, the very undoing of the world? Tell me, magician, what use would I have for a world of wreckage? Why would I wish to rule over ruins?" Amaranth then turned and sat back upon his throne. He folded his hands together and waited for Kester's reply. Kester seemed taken aback with such questioning. He knew then that he could no longer delay the answers with more riddles. The reason he had done so up to this point was to stay any more confusion onto the king. This was a rather complicated matter, and Kester figured that the less the king knew, the better. Now, however, Kester knew that the king would not grant him any more means to conquer the mountains and achieve his goal without further explanation. Full detail would be necessary, and Kester slowly began. "Your Highness, the weapon I speak of is not truly a weapon at all. Instead, it has the ability to command a power so great, so devastating, so terrible that no army upon this earth can rival." Amaranth laughed and outright scoffed at this notion. He leaned forward in his throne and said, "Magician, you are indeed a jesting fellow. You would have me believe that a slab of wood can do such a thing? Bah! Such musings hold no merit with me, warlock. 'Tis no mere musing, my lord. The capability of the elm stave is very real. There are none left now who know what potential it holds, save for myself." "Are you not fortunate to be in my graces?" Kester replied with a sneer rising from his sharp face. "Pray tell, magician." "How fortunate am I truly?" Amaranth asked as he smiled sarcastically. Kester's sneer became a smirk as he said, "Tremendously so, my lord. The power of the elm stave is not from what it is, but rather from what is carved upon it. Runes from a long-forgotten time, a spell in a forgotten tongue. A spell that can raise a horrible power from its slumber, that can free an ancient captive from its crypt. A spell that can give me command of a power of which this earth has not seen since before time itself. A spell that only I can read. Only I can answer it, and only I know what it can do. Certain victory, my lord. The fiercest weapon at my behest. Surely, you mean our behest? Amaranth interrupted with a piercing glare. He had almost hoped to catch Kester in this slip of words as to confirm his own suspicions, and to legitimize his paranoia against his fear of madness. Instead, Kester, being not only a weaver of vile spells, but of sly words as well, replied. Most certainly, my lord. 'Tis only a flowing expression, your highness. What I command, you shall also. Your army, do they not sway to your tide? I pull their strings, yes, but only under your direction, my lord. This terrible power I speak of, will differ not from such order. Amaranth's eyes squinted into slits of a suspicious stare and said. Only you can read this spell, you say? Perhaps you are unaware that I have ears all throughout this land, and I hear what there is to be heard. My advisors tell me that there is someone else that can also read this slab of yours, and that you are not the only one. They tell me that you are either a liar or are far too arrogant in your plan to notice a potential flaw. Which is it, magician? And what of this news? Do you think of me as a fool who would not have the foresight to investigate matters on his own accord? Or would you have me blind to your movements, deaf to your dealings, and unwise to your accounts? Tell me otherwise, I beg of you, for your sake. Kester straightened himself as an explanation grew within him. He laughed ever so slightly and said, Forgive me, my lord, perhaps I have not been entirely forthright. Whether you feel it is wise to trust those slimy serpents that you call advisors or not, is your decision, my king. However, what they tell you is indeed true, there is another who knows what I do. What they did not tell you is that this is no bother to us. It is no cause for alarm, nor is it a kink in our chain. No one has heard from her in many ages, and witnesses of her work are few and far between. She is not but a whisper upon a howling breeze, and only absorbed in her own amusements. She is no threat to us, my lord. Furthermore, I am vexed by your suspicion. Still you think of my betrayal as inevitable. Very well, if you do not trust me, then ride with me. Let us ride and purge the mountains of its filth and quench the lands of its vermin. Watch me, police my actions if it comforts you, but, I urge you, do not stay our progress with your contemptible fear. Empty this kingdom of its army and send them forth to the wretched mountains to cleanse the north of such peasants, peasants that dared stand against us, peasants and vagabonds that are now the only thing standing between you and total domination. They guard the elm stave and yet have no knowledge of what it is. The fates do indeed laugh at such injustice. The irony to hold such power and not use it. If they will not, then we shall take it from them, we shall pry it from their filthy fingers and rule the north absolutely. Let it be done. What say you, King Amaranth, Lord of Gordival, Keeper of the Southeast, Driver of the terrible claw, what say you? Do we rest now upon a fleeting breeze of conquest and rule over only ourselves? Or do we plunge triumphantly into what is meant to be? Upon hearing this, Amaranth turned a thoughtful gaze away from Kester and stared with a storm of musings. So much so, that his eyes looked like the gears of a clock. A moment passed and only the crackle of the fire filled the silent void. Amaranth sighed deeply, slumped back into his throne, and said, So be it, magician. So be it indeed. In a week's time, we shall muster our full strength and amass upon the mountains. We shall cut down any who stand before us. We shall rule the mountains before the month is over, and with that grain of sand in the hourglass, we shall be the spear through the heart of CLAUS. I shall grant thee what thou hast sought, but know this, warlock, if there will be any question that beckons your betrayal unto me, my sword shall find thee, and be its answer. Kester sneered once again and replied. Your terms are fair, my lord, fair enough, indeed. Their sinister meeting adjourned, and, unbeknownst to them, within the fire upon the hearth, a faded and ghostly face stared out at them. It was that of an old woman, and seemed to be only a vapor, the flames that licked around it formed its shape. It was unseen and unnoticed as it had stared and listened to their vile conversation. Being satisfied with what it had heard, the face slowly faded away, and all that remained in the fireplace was the crackling flames. An ill silence was upon Gordival, and the long night rolled on to become morning.